All right. Good afternoon. Um, so I apologize at the length of time that it took to grade the essays. As I'd mentioned in an earlier video, I was in Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma, earlier this week, going through a professional development training teacher seminar over foundational documents and the sort of governmental understanding, the foundation of the country, stuff that obviously doesn't necessarily matter for you. But so I was trying to grade those during breaks. And so I've completed it. I'm back home now. Um, and so your essay grades have been published. Um, and I just want to make a couple of points. One, very alarmed by the number of students that did not follow directions. In fact, I had so many students not follow directions. I actually went back and watched one of my own previous videos just to ensure that I told you make your paper look like the sample paper. Um, and I only had one student email me asking where they could find the sample paper. It was literally right above where the actual assignment was. Um, but between my two sections, I believe I have 57 students. Out of those 57, I think two have probably dropped. They've stopped submitting stuff altogether. And I had another two that submitted things that I can't read. So those two still have zeros. Well, one because they submitted a document I couldn't read. The other one because they didn't submit. They actually submitted the assignment. They didn't submit the document. But didn't submit an essay. But so that takes us down to probably 50. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, 54. Out of 54 students, 25 double spaced their papers or added a cover page, did things that were um, definitively not a part of the sample paper. That I realized that some of you struggled with how to create footnotes. I wish you'd asked. You can go to YouTube. The reality is that Microsoft Word will actually create footnotes for you and do it with honestly with almost no work on your part. But that's obviously a fairly substantial issue. The only other things that I really wanted to point out about the essay, there are essentially two types of arguments um, that were frequently made that are ultimately what I'm going to call poor arguments. And so what I mean by that is things that would have actually cost you ever so slightly on your actual grade, right? So number one, the number of you that made arguments about following precedent, right? And precedent is important. It is, but it cannot be the end all of an argument. It cannot be the rationality for why something should not happen within the court. If that were true, we would still exist in sort of a segregated America, right? Brown versus Board of Education overturns precedent. And the reality is that the court has to be able to overturn precedent at least from time to time, because the court is going to get things wrong, and therefore there has to be some mechanism to fix that. Right along with that is sort of an even worse argument, in which you say, well, the case was a result of judicial activism. And that's a very loaded term. We don't have enough time to get into it, honestly, but there's a wide variety of sort of judicial philosophies that you can follow. But the concept of judicial activism simply means that the court has overstepped its boundaries, right? The reality is the loser, meaning the minority, always believes that. Always. They sort of have to, by definition, right? They believe that they're interpreting the Constitution correctly and that the majority is interpreting the Constitution incorrectly. Therefore, they are activist jurists. So again, not a good argument for why something should or should not be constitutionally permissible. Okay. Then the other one that I will call your attention to, or the other sort of argument type, is moralistic arguments. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the court doesn't care about morals at all, but I would actually argue that the court ought not to care about morals. Morals are subjective, right? And law needs to be objective. Okay. And so if you don't understand the difference between subjective and objective, right? Subjective is based upon me and my personal thoughts and feelings. Objective exists outside of me and therefore is applicable to all. Law has to be, or again, I mean, there's instances where it's not, but I would argue that those instances are wrong. Law has to be objective. Therefore, everyone is treated the same and everyone knows what is and is not permissible, and that cannot be subject to individual whims or individual beliefs within morality or things of that nature, right? So moral arguments are generally not, or they're not generally, they are not good arguments, okay? So that would be the two sort of big things that would need to be discussed in that regard. I don't know that there's really anything else that I need to say about the papers sort of holistically. If you have individual questions, by all means, email me and ask. I tried to put ample comments on there, right? So there should be an abundance of comments and explanation. And then I do want you to understand there's a difference between sort of questions that I put on your paper versus those things that were subject to grading, right? If I ask you, for instance, a number of students write about Citizens United, right? So let's look at that case real quick, right? So if you don't know, Citizens United versus the FCC is basically a free speech case and whether or not corporations have free speech, right? So all of you, because you have to write the dissenting opinion, basically say that Citizens United should not be allowed and that corporations should not have free speech, and we ought to put limitations on corporate spending. Right now, I think I did ask a number of you: does it make a difference if it's for-profit corporation versus non-profit? Right. Some of you actually made that distinction yourself, and you added in unions and those things that do not exist for profit as a part of the entities that should have limitations upon their speech, right? But then I would beg the question to all of you, and I do this to all of my students anyways, how do we deal with somebody then like Mike Bloomberg, right? And so this is a question that comes up. You're not being graded for this. Like, I want you to understand that, right? I at no point in time, because you didn't address Mike Bloomberg in Citizens United, do I somehow dock your grade. That's not the purpose of it, right? The purpose of it is to ask you if Citizens United was decided incorrectly, and we cannot have sort of collective corporate speech, right? How do we handle somebody like Bloomberg, who in 2020 ran for the Democratic nomination for president of the United States for about a month, right, officially? And in that month, he spent $1 billion with a B, billion, okay, $1 billion of his own money. It was his, right? The dude makes Donald Trump look poor, right? In fact, the difference in wealth between me and Donald Trump is less, significantly less, than the difference in wealth between Donald Trump and Mike Bloomberg, right? That should give you an idea of how rich Bloomberg is. Okay? In fact, I did the math for students, right? $1 billion of his worth was basically equivalent to $50 of my worth, right? 50 bucks. So then the question begs, what do we do with him, right? Can he spend $1 billion of his own money, right? Now, I think most people would argue, well, yeah, I mean, it's free speech, right? If he wants to take out an ad, with his own money, he can kind of do that because it's his money, and we can't really dictate to people what they do with their own sort of the fruit of their own labor, right? If we dictate how you can spend your money, then that means that you sort of no longer own your own labor and you're now a slave, and that gets into a whole slippery slope that we don't really want to deal with, right? But then if Mayor Bloomberg can spend $1 billion of his own money. Obviously, I don't have a billion. I don't have anywhere close to $1 billion, right? But maybe I have $1 million, right? And maybe I have 100 friends that also have $1 million, right? And we want to collectively spend our money together to advocate for something. Why can't we do that, right? Or more importantly, poorer people who may only be able to give $20, $50 to some sort of cause, right? That $20 or $50 is, I mean, literally, it's a raindrop in the ocean, which would have absolutely no impact unless you can operate collectively. That's sort of the purpose behind collectivism and collective power, right? And so I'm actually not saying that Citizens United was decided correctly. I'm actually not. I think that the reality is, and I tell students this, Citizens United is probably one of the very few Supreme Court cases I'm aware of that both sides are losers, right? Like no matter what you decided in that instance, it's bad. It's bad. You just, unfortunately, the court has to sort of decide which loss is less detrimental to the welfare of the nation. So obviously that becomes very, very opinionated. So understand that when you see a comment like that, that's not something that you're being graded on. I will be 100% honest. Predominantly, you are being graded on, or really what knocks your grade down. And I did have a student this semester who got 100 on this paper, right? But ultimately, what knocks your grade down is first and foremost the inability to follow directions, right? So of those 25 people, I don't think a single one of them earned an A, right? Because they couldn't follow directions. Two, uh, this is the one formal paper, right? And I told you this in the instructions that I went back and rewatched to make sure that I did tell you this, right? It's a formal paper. I don't grade your short responses for grammar. I don't care. Like the reality is that's about the process of learning and articulating and formulating an opinion, but it's very different than a formal setting. And so there were far more grammatical errors than what there ought to have been in a formal paper setting. So those would have been the top two reasons that cost people on this. And then I think if memory serves now, and obviously I was grading them sporadically over the entire week, so for a significantly long period of time. I believe one student did write over a case that was not approved, right? That did not meet the requirements of the assignment. And if memory serves, that was probably the worst grade. And I don't think they even failed. I think they actually wrote a fairly decent paper, just not over something that would have met the requirements of the assignment. So I will get back to looking to your discussions and short responses for this week. You do have a quiz assessment, whatever you want to call it, that opened up yesterday morning and closes tomorrow evening. And so we're almost done at this point. We've got just over a week left. So I hope you get the stuff done, and we can get credit and earn and do what we need to do. And I will probably come back with one more video. All right. Thank you.